The Cleveland Browns are 3-1, and so are the Indianapolis Colts. Both teams have had a lot to feel good about in the first quarter of this season, but also it's hard to gauge just how good each team is with the fact that the competition that each team has played has left something to be desired. Indy is the best defense in the NFL, but they've only beaten the Jets, Minnesota, and Chicago, three teams who many would peg as not top-tier offenses. Conversely, the Browns have one of the best offenses in the NFL through 4 weeks, but similarly have not beaten a top 10 defense yet. So for both teams, this is a fascinating measuring stick for just how good each team's best unit is. Who will come out on top? The unproven Colts defense or the unproven Browns offense? It's an interesting question, so let's talk about it. Real quick, if you're new here, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button so you can be notified when I upload a ton of videos coming out during the NFL season. You want to make sure you're locked in here so you don't miss a single thing. So hit that subscribe button and ding that notification bell. As always, I'm going to try to break this preview down into different battles among the offensive and defensive units of both teams. So the first one I'm going to go with is the Indianapolis passing offense versus this Browns secondary. The Colts have some interesting stats in this area of the game that are pretty revealing. They have a 2.3 second pocket time, which is one of the lowest in the NFL, and a low pocket time is usually associated with having a bad offensive line. But when you look at those numbers, you realize that the offensive line has only given up 4 sacks and 22 pressures. So something tells me that this is by design. If you watch the Colts, it definitely is by design. The passing attack relies heavily on Yak. 481 yards of the 900 plus passing yards that they have are by Yak. It's almost 49% of all the passing production is done with Yak. As far as advanced rankings go, DVOA says they're the 14th ranked passing offense as a unit, and PFF ranks their individual players as the 10th best unit. They're tied for 10th, actually. So that's all interesting for Indy. Also, it's interesting to see where the Colts move the ball, and this is also where it gets a lot more obvious what offense that they run and what their philosophy is. 46% of all of the passing attempts are in the first 3/3 of the field, so behind the line of scrimmage, at the line of scrimmage, and then a little bit above the first down marker, but not deep downfield in the middle of the field. That's where they like to attack. Similarly to Dak and the Dallas Cowboys offense, they do like to attack middle short, both vertically and horizontally in their passing attack, but dissimilar to Dak Prescott, this team's personnel and their ability to attack downfield is not what the Cowboys have. When the Colts want to attack downfield, it usually has to be set up. The Cowboys were in a position where they had so much personnel, they could brute force their way down the field. The Colts aren't in that situation. They have to scheme up their looks down the field. And when they do, it's usually deep down either sideline, not usually in the middle portion of the field. So the Colts run a old school Gruden-style West Coast offense. It's really what it looks like. A lot of screens, a lot of quick slants, a lot of getting your ball to the wide receivers and letting them get yak, a ton of dusty double under concepts in their passing attack. That's what they do there. It makes sense with Phillip Rivers. It's not something that he's foreign to. He's ran before. So this all makes sense. They don't do a lot of play action. That's kind of one of the things that separates them from a lot of other West Coast offenses is the lack of play action. They use play action more sparingly, and they use it to set up some deep shots down the field. And if you're wondering how does this match up with the Browns secondary and their pieces when it comes to coverage, and if this is a good fit against them, or is this a good way to attack this Browns secondary? And I would say as weak as the Browns secondary has been through the first 4 weeks, this is actually a good matchup for them. I don't know if it's favorable for them because they have been so bad in the first 4 weeks, but personnel-wise, they can match up well with this Indy offense. They have 3 solid corners in Denzel Ward, Terrence Mitchell or Greedy Williams, and then Kevin Johnson. Their linebackers, especially Malcolm Smith, have done well against the pass, and linebackers are going to be important in coverage on this kind of offense. Also, tackling is going to be important. And the Browns defense in coverage have not been good covering. but they have been solid tacklers. And when you're going against a West Coast offense, it's more important that you have solid tacklers than if you have better coverage people. So that's good for the Browns. Also, your defensive line is able to get pressure with just your front four, which is going to be important because you're going to want to keep your linebackers in coverage a lot against these kind of offenses because they like to attack the middle of the field a lot. And if you have your linebackers in coverage, that kind of cuts down how open things are going to be or how much space is going to be available when they inevitably go towards the middle of the field. See, the big hole that the Browns have in the secondary and what Dak Prescott and the Cowboys were able to exploit in the late third and fourth quarter of the game last week, and also a lot of other quarterbacks throughout the year have been able to exploit, is the safeties' lack of speed. That's the problem with the Browns secondary, is that their safeties cannot cover much ground. And the magic formula has been for the Browns secondary, if you're going to attack it, is the less ground the safeties have to cover, the much better that unit looks. In that first half of the Dallas game, the safeties didn't have to cover much ground because the Browns were able to get pressure with their front four. They were able to stay in quarters. They didn't have to blitz. The safeties only had 1/4 of the field to have to cover, so they were fine in that area. But once the game got on, once Myles Garrett got tired, Larry Ogunjobi had to leave the game. You had to blitz more in order to create that pressure, and that took the Browns out of quarters, which was a massive problem because your safeties aren't particularly fast and aren't able to do that. When you ask them to do what they are good fits for, they're not terrible. They're not good, but they're not terrible. But when you put them in a position where they have to cover a ton of ground, that's when they're at their weakest point. And again, Dallas had so much personnel in that passing game. You got Dak Prescott playing at a top 10 level. You got Michael Gallup. You got Amari Cooper, Zeke Elliott, and CeeDee Lamb just in the slot, chilling. And again, that caused problems when that pass rush needed a blitz to aid it to get pressure. And Sadejo could not cover that much ground. That's why he was always chasing. It looked like he was getting burnt all day because he was asked to cover way too much ground in that game. Indy just simply does not pose that same issue from a personnel standpoint. Yes, they have T.Y. Hilton, but you have Denzel Ward who can match up with T.Y. Hilton. When you look at their other starting wide receivers, you have Darius Fountain and Zach Pascal, who just don't present problems that I think Kevin Johnson and Terrence Mitchell are incapable of answering. The linebackers are just going to be much more important in this week's game plan than the safety play is. And if that's going to be the case, I feel more confident about what you have in your linebacking core as far as coverage goes than your safeties, because your safeties have played absolutely terrible through 4 weeks. Your linebackers have actually played decently. So even though pass coverage is a weakness, and I don't think it's going to be a strength this week by any means, I don't think Indy is really in a great position to attack that weakness of the Browns. Now, we're going to talk about the next matchup, which is the Colts run offense versus the Browns run defense. Now, the Colts rely on their run game for a large part of their offense. It makes up for a large portion of the numbers of plays they take from their offense. It's about 131 rushing attempts so far this season. To reference how much they run the ball, they're like 5th in the NFL, and the Browns are like right next to them, and the Browns only have like 8 more attempts than them. So Browns at 139, they are at 131. So they run the ball a ton. If you think the Browns run the ball a ton, they run the ball just as much. But despite having the 4th most rushing attempts in the NFL, they rank 13th in total yards, which is not necessarily great. If you ask DVOA, they think that the Colts have the 23rd ranked rushing offense with the 13th ranked run blocking offensive line. Pro Football Focus has them ranked 28th in both categories, respectively. It's not the greatest unit in the world. And they might not have Anthony Costanzo, who may miss this week, which honestly might help Indy when it comes to running the ball because he's just been terrible in run blocking. But then you're going to have to invite the Myles Garrett problem if that is the case. So that's not something that has a clean answer there either for Indy. On the other hand, the Cleveland Browns have been an exceptional run defense unit. They have the 5th least rushing yards allowed per game at 367 yards. They have the 8th least yards per carry at 3.9, and they've done this against solid run competition. Baltimore, the number 8 run offense in the NFL. Dallas, number 12 run offense. Cincy, who I don't know how highly they rank, but Joe Mixon is on that team. He's a very good running back. The Browns held him to a low number, although I don't think Cincy really have been using him right until that game against Jacksonville. DVOA says that the Browns have the 10th best run defense in the NFL. Pro Football Focus says number 12. The Browns should be able to stop the run, but if Larry Ogunjobi is not healthy and able to play, that is going to be a huge factor. He's missed 2 practices with an abdominal injury. He is an integral part of what the Browns do when it comes to stopping the run on the inside. So him not being there is going to make a difference. And hopefully for the Browns, he can be there, because if he's not, that will be an issue. Which honestly for Browns fans is a little bit of a shock, because Larry Ogunjobi has been exceptional in run defense, which has not been the case his first 3 years in Cleveland. Definitely wasn't the case last year. So either he figured something out or something, because he is so much better in that area. So hats off to Larry Ogunjobi. Hope he can play this week. Now we're going to move on to the second matchup, which is the Browns passing offense versus this Colts secondary. Now, when you talk about the Colts, you have to talk about their defense. And when most people talk about the Colts defense, they really focus on that front four, right? They think the Colts have the best defensive line in football, or one of the best defensive lines in football. And a lot of people think that's the strength of the Colts team. But that's not where the teeth of that defense is. That's not where the strength of that defense is. The teeth of this defense is their ability in pass coverage. Because when you look at everything that they have done throughout these first 4 weeks, I don't care what kind of competition it was against, it has been phenomenal. Long story short of this part of the video, keep Baker Mayfield's attempts under 30. That is a winning strategy for the Cleveland Browns, because this secondary for Indy is really good. Darius Leonard, TJ Carey, and Xavier Rhodes have all been playing at top 10 levels as far as coverage players go in the NFL. And if you just want to see a crazy stat line, allow me to show you their team defense stat line against the pass. 62% completions, only 637 yards through 4 games. That is 159 yards per game that they give up through the air. That is insanely low. 5 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. This is one of the best coverage defenses in football. And to put in perspective how crazy low that 237 yards number is, understand there's not a single quarterback in the NFL through 4 games that has had less than 700 yards. So the Colts are dominant in that area. Just absolutely dominant. Now, I will say this. You can score on this defense and in this secondary in the red zone. That's where they're a little bit weaker. You can attack them there, but getting there, run the ball. Now, this is the marquee matchup of this week's game. This is where the game is going to be decided, in my opinion. When the Browns have the ball, whoever wins that battle along the defensive and offensive line is going to win this game. Long story short. And let me be clear, this projects to be one heck of a battle. DeForest Buckner has been the best interior defensive lineman in football. And Justin Houston has been a top 10 edge rusher. So this defensive line is no joke for the Colts. They are very good. It's the best defensive line the Browns have played since Washington. Indy has, according to PFF, the number 7th ranked pass rush and the number 8th ranked run defense. DVOA says the defensive line is the number 9 in pass rush and number 16 against the run. Now, this is going to be the biggest test for a top-ranked Browns offensive line, because the Browns have run the ball against a lot of teams, some decent defensive lines and some bad defensive lines. But more so, I think this Browns run offense is going to be a huge test for this Indy defensive line, because they've had success against the Jets, which have looked universally terrible in every game they have played. The Vikings, who have been really bad. They have a good running back when it comes to running the ball. It's just their offensive line is poor. The Bears, who have a good offensive line and some decent personnel at running back, they just threw the ball 42 times for whatever reason with Nick Foles. And when Nick Foles is in there, you have to run more shotgun because that's just what he's comfortable with. That's always been the case throughout his career, is that it's hard to have a strong rushing attack with Nick Foles unless you can really run the ball well out of shotgun, because that's just going to be what it is with Nick Foles. And of all these teams that the Colts have beaten so far this season, the Browns run the ball the most, and they block the best, and they have the best personnel. The one team the Colts did lose to, the Jacksonville Jaguars, kept passing attempts down. I think Gardner Minshew had 20 passing attempts, was like 17 to 20, insanely efficient. Also, they ran the ball a ton, which I expect the Browns to have a similar strategy. And while the Colts may have the singular best defensive lineman in football in DeForest Buckner right now, the Browns also have the best interior offensive line in football right now. These are all PFF grades, so take them with a grain of salt or whatever you want to take them with. But J.C. Tretter is ranked the second highest graded center in all of football. The Browns also have the number 1 graded guard in football and also the number 9 graded guard in football in Wyatt Teller and Joe Bitonio. So the Browns' strength on this offensive line, which is their absolute strength, is on the inside. So the strongest individual portion of this team is going against probably the Colts' best player. It's going to be interesting and fascinating to see which one wins out there because this offensive line is just so stout. Pro Football Focus has them ranked as the number 1 run blocking offensive line, the number 2 pass blocking offensive line. DVOA also says the Browns have the number 1 run blocking offensive line, while it disagrees, number 17 in pass blocking. So that is going to be the most important battle on the field. Now, what are my final thoughts about this game? Well, let's jump into them. This game this week is going to be entirely decided on if the Browns can run that ball in the face of the best interior defensive linemen in football, along with some of the best linebackers in football. If they can, like they have the last 3 straight weeks, they will win. The Achilles heel of this team, the safeties, is not going to be under attack, is not going to be as exposed as it was in Dallas last week. So I don't think Indy is due for an offensive explosion. They're going to be able to move the ball, but it's not going to be like Dallas where they could move it at will. So for the Browns to lose this game this week against the Colts, Indianapolis has to win that battle in the run game. They have to be able to either keep the Browns behind the sticks or in 3rd and long situations and then force the Browns to have to throw the ball more than 30, 35 times. And if you do that, you will force some turnovers and you will give your offense some short fields, and your offense is going to need those short fields because as much as I don't think the Browns defense is extra vulnerable to Indy, I'm not mistaken that Indy can't score in the red zone against the Browns. The Browns are one of the weakest red zone defenses in the NFL. But ultimately, that's the win scenario for the Colts, and it's almost the same for the Cleveland Browns. Both require having to win this singular battle. When the Browns have the ball, who's going to win the battle on that line of scrimmage? Is it going to be the Browns offensive line? Is it going to be the Colts defensive line? Because both teams' path to winning that game is going to come down to that matchup. And whichever team does that, whichever team wins that matchup, will win this game. Now, the obvious caveat is that each of these teams can beat themselves. The Browns can get penalties and fall behind the sticks and do that on their own, and the Colts can do the same. The Colts are one of the most penalized defenses in the NFL, so that can definitely happen. But barring that, there are 2 obvious things each team needs to avoid. The Browns need to avoid having to throw a lot against this Indy secondary, and the Colts need to avoid the Browns being able to score. And how do the Browns score a lot? With their run game, so they need to stop the run. So who has a better chance at winning this week? I think the Browns do. It's a home game, and I think that their matchup and their battle against that defensive line favors the Cleveland Browns for a couple of reasons. I think it's going to be easier for the Browns to win that battle because they have 3 top 10 interior offensive linemen versus Indy, who just has that one player who is the best in his position, but still just that one guy. And the Browns also have that strength on both sides of the offensive line, so it's not like you just move DeForest Buckner around to a weak link in this offensive line. That's just not going to be a good strategy for the Colts. I do worry if Indy is going to be able to do a good enough job against this offensive line to kind of occupy a lot of these guys on the first level, and that way you would allow their linebackers to run free and clog up gaps and stop the run like that, which they are definitely capable of doing. But that would be more of a concern if the Browns only had 1 or 2 good offensive linemen The reality is that they have 5 good offensive linemen and some really good blocking tight ends as well. So they should be able to take care of those second level blocks and do some things to be able to get past these linebackers. There are definitely some concerns here. I don't expect this to be a blowout by any means, but if the Browns can win that battle, and I think it leans more in their direction that they should be able to win that battle, then I think the Browns will win this game. But that's what it's going to come down to. That's my thoughts on this game. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Do you think the Browns are going to win this game? Do you think it's going to come down to that battle? Let me know your thoughts. But again, guys, thank you for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.